here in a minute or two how it is that the research can be developed for the good of people at large and for the pharmaceutical industry. And nothing wrong with working for the pharmaceutical industry. It gets a very bad press, but they also do good work, and we can help with it. And I think that, I hope that the people who are now going to be responsible for the garden will be, well, each one a little mishuga ledavar. Mishu shechol latet lo rak yeda.
He's being English.
Oh, all right. Okay. Oh, yes, of course, I forgot your audience is abroad. Yeah. Well, anyway, who are a little bit over-devoted, very, very keen, and are willing to give their time and their energy to something which will take time. The results will not be immediately apparent because they believe in it. That's what it's about, you see. These kind of developments, which are not well financed, which are not central, are always difficult. And you'll find, just as say, some of you will know Yossi Leshem, my friend Yossi Leshem was the bird man in Israel. He did this bird stuff from nothing. He did it because he believed in it. When I went with him to Turkey to some big conference, I saw that he loved the birds, that he actually, he loved his family and all that, but he also loved the birds. And Elaine is the same. You go around her hothouse, and what do you hear? You hear, this plant, it's not doing too well, and this one's got a cough, and it's very, the plants live for her, and that's what people in this garden are going to do. They're going to live for it, and they're going to make it work. And I don't suppose that in 10 years' time I'll be around, but I shall watch it from above. You watch out, you'll get a lightning stroke if you're not careful. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. I didn't have a chance to introduce you before. That was Robin Twite, as you mentioned, former head of the British Council in Israel, and also a great friend of the Arava Institute and of the Shelter Garden specifically. So thank you very much. And I would now like to introduce our next speaker, who is Merav Lebel. Merav, we used to be colleagues a long time ago. And aside from doing her PhD in the Tel Aviv University, she also works in the National Program for Endangered Plant Species.
And for the introduction, and all of you there in Machon Arava and at home. And as Oren said, today I'm going to talk about the project that I'm been coordinating for the last decade now, and I'm very proud to take part of it. So we're going to talk about why do we need to conserve plants to begin with, which species are at risk of extinction, what is their legal protection status, what is our conservation strategy, and then I will give some examples of the action that we're making to do this conservation. So why do we need to conserve plants? Probably most of you know that we're in the middle of a big biodiversity crisis. It's caused, of course, mainly by human activities. And some will say that we're in an ongoing 6th mass extinction. Of course, plants are a very big and important part of this biodiversity. And how do we know what are the species that are at risk of extinction? So here, this is from the website of the IUCN Red List. The IUCN has a red list of threatened species. It includes animals and plants. And this is a global assessment. In Israel, we also have the Israeli Red Book that was published in 2007 and 2011. And it has a red list for plants, endangered plants of Israel. It has a local system that's different from the system of the IUCN, and there are more than 400 plants in this list. Here is, you can see the IUCN criteria for estimation versus the parameters of the Israeli Red List. And the IUCN criteria consist of 5 different criteria. You only need to meet one of them to do the assessment. And they deal with the reduction in the population size, the decline of the geographical range of the species, small populations that are also in decline, and also very small or restricted populations that, even though they are not declining right now, a stochastic event or any other event might erase or extinct these species. And also, you can use quantitative analysis to try and evaluate a species extinction risk. In the Israeli method, we use 5 different parameters. It's a cumulative method, so you get a score for each of the parameters, and then you get a final score. That's the red number, and that means where are you in the red list. The parameters are the rarity of the species that has this very small population, very small geographic range will get higher score for rarity. Vulnerability deals with the vulnerability of the habitat. Attractiveness mainly means the size of the flower. Endemism is this plant only occurring in Israel or neighboring countries. And peripherality deals with the distribution of the species and Israel distribution edge. I mark with an X the parameters of the Israeli red number that are not included when you do the IUCN estimation. So now we know how we can make a red list, but how we protect those plants. So in Israel, until 2019, there were only 66 species from the Israeli Red Book that were protected by law. And you can ask yourselves why. Here you can see some pictures, some examples of plants that are endangered in Israel and were protected by law. You can see there are nice, attractive flowers. You can see their irises, orchids of all kinds, kolchikum. And the reason is that in 1936, there was the National Parks and Nature Reserves law was published. And as part of this law, there was a list of protected species. Species were mainly species that were collected. Here you can see posters of that time. There was a very big campaign against flower picking. People picked flowers at home and for the kindergartens, and they also sell them in the street. So the main threat was flower picking, and that's how they picked the list of protected plants. Today, you probably know the threats are different. Plants are mainly threatened by human activity, development, building, infrastructure. So we know we need to change this law. And since 2019, after a very long legal procedure, all the endangered plants are protected by law now. I put these small asterisks because every year we updated the list of the endangered plants, and the law can't be updated on a yearly basis. So right now, since 2019, there are already plants that are in our list, but they are not protected by law. So do we actually need to conserve endangered plants? And the answer is, of course, yes. Because legal protection is not enough, as I already mentioned. Some of the plants are not protected by law, but even the plants that are protected by law need our help. We need many times to do some active management inside to protect the plants. That means we need a conservation strategy. We need to know what we want to conserve, priority list, from what are the threats that we're dealing with now. Where do we conserve those plants only in nature reserves or also outside of the nature reserves? And what are the actions that are needed? That means we need to do some decision making, and that's why a committee was formed in 2011. You can see here the list of the current members of the committee, and here in the photo some of them. Ori Fragman-Sapir, that we'll talk later. I guess this is his chair and he went to make himself some coffee, but he's also part of the committee. And the committee decided that first we need to deal with the 40 plants that are endangered, but also endemic to Israel. For each of these species, a detailed plan was written. And also some hotspots of endangered plants from 3 main habitats were chosen, and a plan was also written for those sites for conservation. And then we need a national plan that involves all species. So this is a schematic way to look at our conservation strategy. I won't go through all of it. We already talked about the legal protection, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we keep our data updated, some in situ conservation methods, and some ex situ conservation. And then I will talk about reintroduction, that is a combination between ex situ and in situ. So how do we keep our data updated? We have a website, the redlistparks.org.il. It keeps growing and updating. And when it started, we uploaded the Israeli Red Book that was not printed anymore. So that way, this information could be available to everyone. Right now, unfortunately, it's only in Hebrew, but we do have an English version, so I hope it will be online soon enough. And besides the information about the list that keeps updating, we also have the information of the distribution of each of the species. You can see it on a map, and it gets updated all the time. The information is obtained by this app, this application. If everyone can download it to the cell phone, and all the information that we get from everyone, it can be rangers, botanists, specialists, but also everyone that's traveling in Israel and encounters an endangered species. It's all getting validated by our committee, and then it's published to everyone to see. So some in situ conservation, we do it inside using the help of rangers and ecologists, also expert botanists, but also volunteers and communities that want to help monitor or help conserving plants around their neighborhood. It can be monitor plan for specific population, but we also do some cutting of vegetation when needed and other stuff. We also do a species distribution survey. It's been done since 2013. It's performed by Machon Deshe. Right now it's from the Tel Aviv University, from the museum. And every year, approximately 15 species are being surveyed. Those are the target species, but of course, they also find other endangered species on the way. And new populations are discovered every year, and also new species. Every year, there are new species to Israel that are discovered thanks to this survey. You can see here a map. It's just the sites that were surveyed until 2020, but it's all over Israel. And here are some of the expert botanists that work in this survey. For ex situ conservation, we work with the gene bank, the Israeli gene bank. They collect seeds from all endangered plants from selected natural population, and then they do the cleaning and storaging of those seeds. They also propagate them in the case that there are not enough seeds for conservation. And they do some germination tests. So we have germination protocols for many of these species. And they prepare seedlings for refuge garden and for some of the reintroduction projects. We also have refuge garden or shelter garden. We have 6 big gardens that are in NPA sites all over Israel. We also have the Botanical Gardens of Israel that also refuge some of the endangered species. But we also have various small refuge plots in different sites, and a lot of, or some private gardens like the garden in Machon Arava. And actually they are all part of a network of living collections of ex situ plants, endangered plants. And those gardens, they share information, they share plants, and they also help us in our projects. So those gardens, they can shelter for endangered species from development around those gardens. So you can save them and put them in those gardens. And they are also source for producing plants for reintroduction, but they are also very important for public awareness and education. That's very important for us. We want people to know what we're doing, what are endangered plants, and what can they do. And that's why we're developing some educational projects in our big gardens. This is an example from Tzipori. And then in some cases, we need to do the combined strategy. That means that if we can't really conserve a plant in its natural site, or if there are not enough natural sites for a plant, we find new conserved plant sites, and we do a range reduction effort. That means we collect the seeds in the field in the natural populations, and then we propagate them in the refuge garden, and we plant them back in the safe site. But we're not alone. We do these range reduction projects with the ecologists and rangers, but we also have the help of volunteers that are really interested in this topic. And we have some cooperations. This is an example from Kfar Yarok. This is an educational institute. They have their own refuge garden. They grow all the endangered plants of the Sharon plains. The kids grow them inside their school, and then they plant the plants in a range reduction experiment that it's part of their school project. And here is just an example of what I'm doing in my PhD. Part of my PhD is doing a range reduction experiment for plants from loamy soils and sandy soils. And the idea is to try and improve the range reduction efforts being made for a long time now. So I mentioned all over my my presentation that it's not a one man's work. We're working with a lot of people and cooperation, and I'm very glad to be part of it. So I thank them all, and I thank you for listening, and I'm open to any questions.
Collaborate with the private gardens in the aspects of education and awareness, or is it just about you know, the species themselves?
We cooperate on whatever the gardens want to do. I mean, we're developing the educational project for our sites inside the NPA, but we're willing to help with information to each garden that wants it or need it.
Merav, thank you very much for such a great introduction to the topic. And our next speaker is Ori Fragman-Sapir, who is the scientific director of the Botanical Gardens in Jerusalem.
Everybody, it's a great honor to be here. And whenever people are asking me what's the best part of Israel, I always say the desert, because the desert is exciting, the most unpredictable environment. The most unpredictable environment, which is the most exciting. And we always say that a thistle in the desert is a rose because each plant is full of magical, I would say, adaptations. So the desert is really exciting, but the desert is also full of challenges, and it's very fragile, I would say. And the climate change was mentioned before. So if we think about climate change in Israel, and if I look at rainfall, let's say in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, the center part of the countries, we have a drop of 5% of average rainfall in the past, let's say, 30 years. And the temperature are rising. But if we look at the drop of rainfall in the southern Arava and Eilat mountains, and maybe somebody here knows better than me, it is much more than 5%. It's probably 30, 40, or even 50% less. So actually the situation in the extreme desert is that we are becoming a Sahara, which is mostly a sterile desert. So in many parts, we are predicting that areas will be sterile of plants. And even if there will be coming a very good rainy year, there won't be any living seeds in the ground to germinate anymore because they died in the long period of drought. In this situation, and I'm not talking about only development that were mentioned before, in this situation, shelter gardens, botanical gardens, in general gardens are very important if we want to protect the diversity in our country. So let's have a look at the map of Israel, and you can see, we all know the gradient of Israel from 800, 900 millimeters of rain in the Galilee, in the Golan Heights, down to 20, 30 millimeters of rain in Elat, and I suppose around here will be 30 to 50 millimeters of rain, depending on the year. And this is really a very unpredictable situation, the extreme desert. And it's a great challenge to protect whatever we have here. And in many parts of the desert, we see something like this. And it's nice to see the cracking soil, and it's nice. And my wife will probably say, "Oh, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. It's beautiful, but it's empty." And it's not empty. It's full of plants, and there are all about 600 species of native plants in the deserts. Of course, the most diverse part of the country is the Mediterranean, the other half of the rainy Israel, but the southern part still have a lot of diversity. And in very rainy, in very rare years, this is what you can see. And I suppose some of you remember the winter of 91, 92 in the Dead Sea. At that year, that area got almost 300% of rainfall. And suddenly, the coast of the Dead Sea, the most saline soil you can imagine, where we thought nothing can grow, not even saline plants, suddenly it was full of plants. So as soon as there is a good rain, the salts are washed into the depths of the soil, and the soil is full of seed, and the seed do germinate. And in general, we know also from the Arava Valley and other parts of the extreme desert, the soil is full of treasures that are waiting for this year. And if we're talking about population size, and in general, the populations of the plants, perhaps the big, I would say the big thing is the rare rainy years. This is when life happens. And we are all eager and waiting for these years. Some of the plants are shrubby and restricted to cliffs or springs, like this merua that grows in the southern Judean desert and in En-Gedi, and also on the other side in the Jordanian part. And this is really extremely rare. I know Elaine is eager to get a plant or two into this garden, and it will happen. This belongs to the caper plant family, and it's an evergreen shrub, tree, leaning tree. It's a plant that didn't decide what it is. It can grow as you prune it. So horticulturally speaking, it's a plant that can answer a lot of situations in your garden, and there are several plants like this. I'm very happy that Meirav gave the introduction, but here I did the red number calculation for merua, so you know what I'm talking about. So this got four grades in rarity, 3 grades in vulnerability. It's not really attractive, probably. I'm always talking with my wife. She doesn't know that, but I'm talking with her. So she will say, tiny flowers, it's not really attractive. It's not endemic, it's not exclusive. And there are less than 50 plants in Israel, gets another expert point, and then it gets a red number of 8. I don't know if Meirav really emphasized this, but a plant becomes a red plant or endangered plant if it gets a grade of 6 points and above. And this is a decision that can be changed. This is what is so nice about this Israeli model that we created long time ago. If we're talking about shrubs, I cannot resist and talk about a rare caper that grows in the southern Arava and in the Elat mountain, and this is Capparis cartilaginea. The picture on the left side is in Elat mountains, not in a spring, in a slope. There is no irrigation there, and it's evergreen, and it looks very fresh all the time. I think this is the answer for landscaping in the extreme desert, and definitely in your gardens. And I know there are several shrubs also in Elaine's garden here and around, but I think this is a magical plant. It blooms with beautiful white flowers. You can see the white flowers that are really big. It's in general, capers are flowers for working people. So that they look like nothing in the daytime, but when you come back in the evening to your home, They are just open for the nighttime, attracting hoverflies and stuff like that. Some years ago, I was staying in Mitzpe Ramon with family, and I decided to make a caper trip. It was in June, and I saw the Egyptian caper in Ramon crater. I continued to Nahal Ketzev, which is not far from here, and saw Capparis Decidua with the red flowers, which is also a very precious endangered plant. And then in the Ramon crater, I saw the very rare and endangered Capparis ramonensis. And then I ended up with this Capparis cartilaginea, 4 species of caper in the southern Negev. So it's true that diversity is not very big, but each of the species is really exciting and really, really important. And I think capers, because they are shrubs, because they behave very well in gardens, they should be including. For example, the red flowers, Capparis Decidua, or leafless caper, is blooming nonstop if it gets just a little bit of water. It just blooms nonstop. So that's why these plants are very, very precious. Here you can see one of the Pseuda Eucharia, which is one of the annual cabbages of this region. And you can see this, this plain that is mostly looking like nothing, but when it gets the rain, again, the seed bank is germinating, and you can get carpets of these flowers. We are trying very hard to crack the propagation of desert plants. And desert plants, unlike Mediterranean plants, are very hard to predict and very hard to propagate, because Mediterranean plants know genetically that there is going to be a rain. Let's say in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, there is an average rainfall, let's say 500, 550 millimeters of rain. In a drought year, in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, still 300 millimeters of rain will get. So even in a drought year, there'll be a substantial amount of rainfall. In the extreme desert, in the desert in general, in a drought year, there won't be a drop of rain. That's why it becomes very, very tough to germinate, and the seed in the soil is thinking. I remind us that plants do not think and they are not aware of anything, but are thinking whether to take the chance and germinate or not to take the chance and germinate. It's a big decision. We think that plants are not making decisions, but they do make decisions, and some of their decisions are very intelligent and very sophisticated, and we don't understand all of them. So plants do not have brain and they are not aware, but they are very sophisticated, not less than us. So this seed has to decide whether to germinate. And if there was 20 millimeters of rain, it could germinate, it could bloom, it can fruit and disperse its seeds. So it did what it had to do. But if there will be 5 millimeters of rain, it will germinate. And if no rain comes again, then it cannot flower, it cannot fruit, and it lost its only chance to propagate because it's an annual plant. So you can see a single annual plant that has a lot of decisions to make, and it's very, very exciting and interesting. That's another one that actually I took this picture not far away from here, from Ptura, which is a volutaria, which is a kind of a small daisy. Again, this is a misleading picture because it looks like a beautiful violet flowers, but it's really tiny. So in some of these desert plants, if we want this place, and if you want this garden, this precious garden, and I saw your garden here, it's really precious because it's on sandy soil. Sandy soil is so precious. It's an endangered habitat, the sandy soil. If you want to make it beautiful, and you must make it beautiful because otherwise nobody will visit your garden, you have to create carpets of flowers and carpets of annuals that will make this garden beautiful. And I know it's tough with the desert plants. In between, the backbone of each garden should be, of course, trees and shrubs. And this is Moringa peregrina, which is not only a beautiful tree with beautiful flowers, with beautiful pods, and it's water saving. It needs very little water to survive. It's also sculptural, and it's also endangered. So it ticks all the reasons why we should grow this plant. And I haven't seen in your garden a single one. Maybe there is. I'm sure, Elaine. Yeah, in the kibbutz. Well, that doesn't count. If you have a shelter garden, excuse me, you must have 20 of those. And the flowers are scented in the evening. And this is a number one. Why I'm saying it's a number one? Because this builds a backbone of the garden. The acacia, this magnificent acacia you have in your garden, which is 300 years old, is an asset, is a sculpture in your garden. It's the backbone of the garden. And if you'll have a few trees that are like that, your garden will be exceptional. After rain, many plants germinate and sprout from the ground. So this is a trichodesma that blooms in the Dead Sea, in the Judean desert, and this is also rare, not endangered, but rare plant. And when we grew this plant, we were really surprised, because in nature, in a good year, it will bloom for 2, maximum 3 weeks a year. But if it gets a dripping water, a dripper, it will bloom most of the year. So there is flexibility, and we can play with this flexibility. Some plants have very limited flexibility. Some plants have big flexibility, and this one can bloom most of the year. That's why this is precious, and it has big sky blue flowers. How many flowers do you know in this color? I know very, very few, maybe alpine flowers. So this is very, very precious. Our flora is is not succulent. So this is one of the very, very few real succulents we have in the flora of Israel. It's a rare plant. Again, it's not endangered. So rarity by itself is not enough to create a plant, to announce a plant as an endangered plant. But this is nice. The flowers are really tiny. It's again a misleading picture here, where you can see they are enlarged in the pictures. But what is really nice about this plant is the silvery finger-like stems. And it's very easy to propagate. It needs a rockery, which is another habitat you don't have already here, but I'm sure you will have in time. And the rockery, because it's drained, it's a very good habitat for all kinds of different plants. If you remember, my first slide was a picture of this guy, which is Astragalus sparsus. This is a perennial plant, that grows in the South Arava and Elat area. I took this picture about 10 years ago in Elat in a rainy season. The diameter of this plant was 3 meters. So again, there is an option. There is a potential, but we have to make it happen. And if you have 3 carpets of these, each one 3 meters across, it's a big display. And it's a challenge, of course, to germinate this plant and to grow this plant. There are a lot of perennial plants. I took a lot of pictures, and if you want, you can distribute my lecture. I will not have time to talk about each of these plants, but a lot of exciting plants. For example, Gomphocarpus, which is a very poisonous plant. So some people, especially Jewish mother, tend to say, "Oh, this is poisonous, don't grow it, I don't want to touch it, I don't want to look at it." But you know that cyclamen and narcissus are poisonous, but we really enjoy them. So why shouldn't we enjoy this one? And this one will have very, very few insects or any other animals that will eat it. Some of the endangered plants are really shy. For example, this Matiola arabica grows only not far away from here, near Timna. And you can see it's a perennial plant. Most of the year it looks really miserable, but it's endangered. And the challenge of botanical gardens in general and gardens for conserving the endangered flora is to explain why is it important to protect such a plant. It's not a beautiful flower, it's not medicinal, it's not economic in any sort of way. And we say we are very talented in extincting plants, in destroying nature. But who knows, maybe this is the next medicine for something. Who knows whether maybe this plant is very important in its ecosystem, and if it gets lost, the whole ecosystem is going to change. That's why we try to save all the flowers. And as I say, because Israel is very dense and very vulnerable, the role of such a shelter garden and beyond the very moving, I was very moved to hear the story, the personal story of this garden. Just, you know, the role of this garden can be much larger. in the future. And you can grow in this garden some very beautiful flowers and some very beautiful fruit. For example, Ephedra ciliata is a shrub that grows in the southern Arava Valley, and it has this fleshy white fruit. It will attract birds. The garden already attracts birds. I was very exciting to see a small a small oriental bee eater this morning in the garden. It's a flying jewel. It's not a bird. It's bright blue small bird. But if you'll have more fleshy fruits, shrubs that are fruiting, you can get a lot of more birds and a lot of more wildlife in your garden. Some of the flora is really tiny. So with tiny flowers, you can really make your job, which is to conserve endangered species, in a few buckets. You can grow maybe 50 plants, more than you can find in nature, and you did your work. And nobody is excited. My wife is not excited. It's not a beautiful flowers, but if you want to save the diversity, you did it in a few buckets in your greenhouse or in your garden or wherever you want. You can grow all these plants. This is the new plant for Israel that was found in Wadi Paran recently by Dudi Rivner from Eilat, and Daphna Carmeli in Gan Midbar in Samar is already propagating it and growing it. So you can be part of this network of shelter garden that can grow things. Sometimes we are lucky, and a very endangered plant is really beautiful. So again, Tephrosia nubica, it's a plant that was thought to be extinct, was refound near Eilat, and it's a beautiful legume with beautiful pink flowers, and they open again in the afternoon, and you can enjoy the beauty of this flower. So the message of my talk is, ignore what you know about desert, that it's very empty and the flowers are not so beautiful, because they are beautiful. Just today, I saw with Oren and Noach, this Tistanche, the middle one, which we don't know what it is. Is it tubulosa, the yellow flowered? Is it violetea, the violet flower? It's in between. We say that plants do not read the books that we wrote. They didn't. It's tricky, but that's why it's so exciting. So you can see a lot of these flowers, and you can grow much more than you do now. And I know it's tricky to get the nice displays that you think about, but it's really possible. Definitely with big trees like Haifaini, and the right picture I took in Elaine's greenhouse. She's the only one who is propagating these trees. And you know, the sky is the limit. Why not grow these desert daffodils in your sands? They are growing, they're very, very endangered in the extreme desert, but you can find them and you can grow them just around the corner. There are a lot of tiny flowers and big flowers. For example, this Lonea will grow very big and will get full of flowers. I know it's tiny, but you don't have to hug it. You just have to watch it and enjoy it. And you can grow, you know, some of the rarest plants you already do with the Ziziphus numularia. And if we go back to the backbone of the garden, definitely the date palm. Definitely date palm, precious ancient date palms, new date palms, wild date palms, cultivated date palms. You can have an oasis of date palms, and in between have all your endangered plants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ori, for giving me personally, I hope to some other people here, a lot of hope and a lot of great ideas. We already have some questions. But I think we have time for one or two questions. So
as usual, the answer is depends. Some plants will resist this water, some plants will not. And again, in many cases, we don't know it all. So until we try, we don't know. Definitely, that's a limiting factor, but you have to try. And I'm sure you'll succeed with some of the plants.
Thank you. Somebody on the Zoom, Bob Schloss, is asking, has anyone proposed using young adult, very religious Israelis who are doing national service instead of serving in the IDF to do more frequent rare plant surveys?
I'm sorry to say, but this is not my field. Yeah. I'm sure it could work. I'm sure that we don't know enough, and this is the best place to try. This is where you can be innovative and make a real change. I'm sure that if this garden is going to thrive and bloom, it will affect pollinators in the neighboring agriculture areas, and definitely can give ideas about your testimonial, let's say, rows of wildflowers in the date groves or other crop areas. So I think there is a great potential for that.
Thank you very much, Ori. And next, I invite Elaine to come. It's funny to that I would just to introduce who Elaine is, because everybody knows who Elaine is, but for the sake of it, well, as you know, Elaine is essentially the founder of the Center for Sustainable Agriculture and of the Shelter Garden, and was the driving force, as Robin said, the Meshugat Ladavar, who made sure we still have it. We still have that wonderful acacia and all the other plants, and she's going to talk about one specific species.
Hello. The species I'd like to talk about is the Capparis Decidua. This is a plant that is quite rare. As a matter of fact, I think there's only between 12 and 20 in the whole country. I'm not entirely sure about the ones that are planted, but the ones that have been planted, for instance, in the Wadi by Eilat, and the ones that are in Kibbutz Samar are all from Jordan. And I really, really, really want to get the propagation going on the ones in Wadi Ketzef. Wadi Ketzef is a wadi up by, it's a wadi up. It's the wadi up by Shittim, which is, let's just say it's on the way to Mitzpeh Ramon, okay? It's not an easy place to get to. It's off-road. It's also an area frequented very much by the IDF. We are not entirely sure whether or not there are more of these plants somewhere, because a lot of areas in the Negev have been walked on, but nobody has actually done a survey. And we are hoping to find other populations. Okay. So this is one of the plants that cannot decide whether it wants to be a tree or a shrub. And as far as we know, they sprouted about 100 years ago. They may be sort of a plant out of time, because it may have been slightly different as far as climate went 100 years ago. We're not entirely sure, but there's 12 more or less running along the borders of a stream, not an ordinary kind of stream, but one that only runs every once in a while. So one of the things that's interesting about this is there are no young ones. This is also true of the acacias in the area. There's a lot of acacias you drive past as you go to Wadi Ketzef, and they're also absent. And I'm thinking that perhaps we have a problem of the young ones being eaten, all the young ones being pulled out by the gazelles and other creatures in the area. And there are a lot of them. I was thinking the best way that we could possibly preserve them in situ where they are is maybe we could fence a couple of them off and see what happens. Now, this is a very, very radical thing to do. The Nature Protection Society does not like you putting fences up, but I do not see any other way we could keep the antelopes out of the particular area that these plants are in and find out whether there's recruitment and naturally, and these little plants are just being pulled up and eaten. I tried sprouting them. I was there in that particular area 2 years ago. It was June, a bit late to be gathering seeds. I grabbed a handful of seeds and dirt and I tried to sprout them. I was not successful. I really do believe that if we collect the seeds at the right time, we can sprout them and grow up the ones that we need. I am not entirely sure about the whole business of suckers because I also tried them. And supposedly we can take a piece off of this particular plant and root it, but I have not seen this. So far, it hasn't worked. One of the things that we have to worry about when we're making cuttings like that is that we have to worry about the seasonality of it. In other words, if I did this in June, it might have been the wrong time to do it. So I would really like to get up to Wadi Ketsev if somebody wants to take me and try again, hopefully in April when the seeds are ripe. This is a very beautiful plant, believe it or not. It doesn't look so good from, it doesn't look so good unless you get close up, let's put it that way. But if you get close to this plant, you'll see that all along the branches are these beautiful little buds, which of course turn into lovely flowers and very, very quickly turn into a small fleshy seed. And it's really amazing to see this plant. What can we do to save it? Well, first of all, I want it very much in my shelter garden. Secondly, I want the antelopes to stop eating all the little ones. And thirdly, I want to find more. I really think we have to preserve this plant where it stands. We have to recruit enough to grow in our shelter garden. And also, we really have to protect them somehow because they need our help. And putting them in the middle of a garden is a good way of keeping them alive, but also having them in an area where the IDF runs around all the time with jeeps and shoots and drops bombs is not a very good idea. I think we ought to make some sort of a special place in Wadi Ketsev for these 20 trees. Is it? Okay. Well, what is suggested? Well, one thing, we have to do a survey of the other wadis. There's a wadi that runs along the highway that goes up to Mitzpeh, and I don't think that anybody has really looked at what's there. It would be very nice if we would find another caper or two. That's one way we could, I hope, increase the population just by finding them. Another thing is we can collect more seeds. Another way we could protect them is, I really think that we should try maybe from the nodal area. I've noticed that some of the capers sprout pretty well from the nodal area on a branch. This is something I would like to try very much with Capparis Decidua. And if there's any sort of a cutting type material growing down by the roots, I would like to try to sprout that as well. We should also, I really think that besides what we are doing to find the caper, we should probably compare the ones from Jordan to the ones in Israel to see whether or not they're the same thing. Because if they are different, if we lose these plants in Wadi Ketsev, we might be losing something very valuable. These capers are good for asthma They're good for worms. They're good for anorexia. They're quite medicinal, actually. And there may be other things that we have not yet discovered about them as far as their medicinal properties. So it'd be very nice to compare the two populations, the Capparis from Jordan and the Capparis from Israel. Thanks.
If anybody has any questions, maybe I'll ask Elaine. Maybe we can ask Elaine, or maybe we can try to answer together. There's very little that we know, of course, about the decidua, because there are so few plants of that species here. Okay, well, then thank you very much, Elaine. Next, I will be introducing myself. My name is Oren Hoffman. I am the recently joined department head for the Center for Sustainable Agriculture. I work with Elaine, happily work with Elaine and with Noach. And I will be presenting about the threats to the local endangered plants. So we've been, so we had some great perspectives on the national program for the red listed species, for the endangered species. And we had Ori's talk, which was quite regional about plants from the area of the Dead Sea and all the way down to Eilat. And I'm going to zoom in even further into the local populations and the southern Arava. The southern Arava, where we live here, has quite a lot of challenges for plants, as Ori has already mentioned. So we're talking about a region that is the northern distribution edge for species that mostly originate. Most of their populations are in Africa, and these are species that can be found either all the way up to here, such as the doom palm, or as far up north as the Dead Sea. Also, we're at the western distribution edge of the more Asian species, Capparis Decidua being greatest example. We also have relict species, so species that probably were in greater numbers here thousands of years ago when it was cooler. The Pistacia atlantica would be a great example of that species. And also we have some last refuges, at least in as far as Israel is concerned, last refuges of diminishing habitats. And again, Ori gave a great explanation. We're talking about sandy habitats, especially, and also salt playas, which we don't have many of in Israel, but we do have them in the Arava. And all these factors act as threats even before humans came here. I mean, even before we started building the kibbutzim here on all the roads, these are already threats to the populations. Again, we've also had the explanation of the problematic issues of drought years, and there have been a few periods of almost a decade with barely any rain, and that obviously is a great threat to many plant populations, not just plants, of course. And as far as climate change is concerned, over the last 30 years, the mean annual temperature has increased by 1.5 centigrade, and we expect that to climb even further. We probably expect more drought years to come in the future, and these all present dangers. And as I said, relict populations. We're talking about some species that have only one known site in the wild. In the case of the Ficus Palmata, which Robin helped us plant down in the shelter garden, we're talking about one individual even, not, it's hardly a population. And we're talking about threats, the modern threats. So what we have here is sightings. Oh, can you see anything here? What we have on the map are sightings of rare plants and endangered plants around Keturah and Lotan. And we have the one species that is found in one location or a couple of locations around the fields in the date orchards of Lotan. It is a species of a sandy habitat, Stipagrostis drari, and you know, we're not sure how long it'll stay there. Other species and Cordia sinensis, which is found in a lot of gardens around here because it's a beautiful plant, but here in the Arava, in the wild, it's found only in one location. A lot of these locations are close to the to human development, possibly also because we mostly go there to look for plants, but also if we're talking about the sandy habitats, that's where we build. That's where we plant our orchards. And if we're talking about the orchards we've already planted and the orchards we plan to plant, so they're exactly where we find that one location. There's actually another location over here, but that's also in the future planned agriculture areas, sit right where that plant currently grows. And also salt marshes, as I mentioned, are also close to human development, and they are habitats of some extremely rare species. And the Phoenix dactylifera, the date palm, that we can consider it wild or left over from previous agriculture, but it is part of the established nature here, and it is part of the heritage that we should keep. We should work to conserve. So specifically regarding the Phoenix dactylifera, the date palms in Endangered, which is a spring or potentially a former spring, since it has been drying down. It has been drying for decades now, due to drought, due to a lot of groundwater pumping, and these the diminishing water in the shallow groundwater is a particular threat for plants of the salt playas, particular threat for the dune palm, the Thebaika here. And I mean, we don't know how long they will stay in the wild without active management. So this is an example of active management. This isn't the example. That's just a map. But the map shows a recent program that is put into place to save the date palm trees by Yotvata in Endangered by digging into the ground and by irrigating them individually. And hopefully that'll save them. And of course, there are the new threats that we don't really anticipate, but we should. For instance, the not one, but two oil spills in Evrona, maybe 20 minutes south of here. And also invasive species. So we've been planting sometimes sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, some species that have great potential for invasiveness. Currently, we mostly find them around where we already built, but they could very well invade into natural areas and endanger the local populations of species. So ex situ conservation or shelter gardens, and not just shelter gardens, but also actual gardens outside our house in the kibbutzim in Eilat. I think they are obviously not a solution to the great biodiversity crisis, but they should be a tool we should be using, and we should be using more as part of the conservation toolbox. And as Ori showed before me, it's not just conservation. There'll also be very beautiful gardens for visiting. And some of these species we can project that already within the next decade or two might be gone without active conservation plans, including conservation in the shelter gardens, including using the shelter gardens to propagate more for gardens here in the settlements. And well, we've already mentioned they have shelter gardens have a role in research and monitoring, and they can allow us to do some of this research without risking the wild populations. And before I finish, we said there will be some time for discussion. So I would like to suggest a few points that I think are worth discussing here now and further on. What is the future of these plant populations with and without ex situ conservation? Can we give it up? Can we say, oh, well, we don't have enough money for the shelter garden, so, you know, what will that mean for some of these species? And we should discuss the roles of shelter gardens in conservation and beyond conservation, other roles in education, in tourism, in gardening, and throw some ideas around and try to consider what are the collaborations we need to achieve those roles. It's a very ambitious plan, but we need to work together to get them. So thank you all for coming. Thank you very much to Robin. Thank you very much to Elaine and to all the other speakers as well, Mirav and Ori. And if there's any questions to me personally, and if not, I'm happy to have a little bit more of a discussion. Ori, I'd be happy if you could come here. So I think probably you should be a great part of this discussion as your role and as your from your role and from your expertise, and we highly appreciate your collaboration with us. Yeah, sure, always here.
Okay, there was a question for Ori from before that we didn't have time for. The question from Morris was, first of all, he enjoyed your talk. He asked, are there any of these lovely plants able to be planted and grown in non-desert areas?
From our experience, not really. I would say even more that many of them do not even survive in Jerusalem, in the Mediterranean kind of environment. So I'm afraid not, unless it's, you know, it's a desert greenhouse in a botanical garden, which is not the case, I suppose.
Hold on, we'll give you a, yes.
I'd like to ask you if there's any formal organization which links the various gardens which have been mentioned here, or do they just depend on personal contact and just by chance? And also, a rather nasty question, what about money? Who is paying for all this stuff? Okay,
I can answer that. There is the Israel Botanical Garden Council, and they are funding botanical gardens in Israel. So botanical gardens that are approved by this council in the Ministry of Agriculture get some funding. I must admit that the fundings are not sufficient. No. They help us, but it's not. Don't expect it to support your garden entirely. It helps at the periphery, and it's important. There is a lot of collaborations between botanical garden, excuse me, shelter gardens. So there's a lot of communication, professional communication, and more than that. And I know from our garden, which is the largest garden in Israel, the only reason we succeed is because we have loads and loads of activities in the garden. So that's the financial answer.
It's Margareta Walczak. I am a plant botanist, a plant ecologist in the Nature and National Parks Authority. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'd like to say that from our experience, we have quite a number of shelter gardens in our sites in national parks and nature reserves. Merav talked about it a lot. In fact, we got a support for establishing of this, at least part of these shelter gardens from Culminated. It's a fund devoted to protection of the heritage of Israel. So the biodiversity was also included to this the heritage. But in fact, the funds were only for establishment of these gardens and not for the everyday maintenance. And in fact, we don't have, unfortunately, funds for supporting other shelter gardens outside of our organization. I think it's very important. Local shelter gardens are very important because they can keep and propagate plants in their natural habitats, more or less, or something very similar to natural conditions, which is perhaps more successful than keeping them and propagating in sites remote and different from natural conditions. Another thing, I think our collaboration in the Israeli Gene Bank is very important, and I would suggest they keep seeds from many populations of threatened plant species. We support collecting of species by the Gene Bank. So perhaps you can also find seeds of Capparis Decidua there. It's worth checking. And if not, we can encourage them to collect seeds and then they also provide seeds for shelter gardens, botanical gardens. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the comment. Yes, we are trying to establish a collaboration with the Nature and Parks Authority, not just for the Capparis Decidua, but in general for our work here to mean something beyond having a nice garden.
All the people connected with the garden know I'm an enthusiast for effects around the garden. I think that a garden needs definition. And as it stands now, it blends into the desert, and that may be right. Do you think we need effects, or do we not need effects? Because my colleagues mostly think this is a waste of money and a bit of plants. But I think that that gardens need a few benches and effects to make them feel like a garden.
If I may answer, I think that at this stage, I don't think there is a need for fence. I think part of the magic of this garden is the fact that it blends into the desert. But as soon as this is developed and as soon as this is looking more like a cultivated area with benches and with a water body, maybe there will be a need in the future. But I don't think this is urgent at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to make another comment about what Margareta was saying. This garden that is located on sandy soil, I've mentioned it in my talk, is a unique situation because desert sands are endangered habitat in Israel. And this is a unique chance to save the endangered desert sand plants of Israel. Not only, but partly. And this is very important. And also with the list that Oren showed us, another thing that might be interesting concerning in situ conservation is collaboration with farmers here. You yourself in this kibbutz, but not only. Some of these, especially sandy parts, are really the periphery of agricultural land. And the collaborations, I don't think the Lotan farmers are really aware about Stipagrostis drari that grows in the single or two sites at the edge of their fields. I'm sure most of them don't. And the same with the farmers in Chatzeva, the same with the farmers in Idan and other places in the Arava Valley. So I think the awareness and the collaboration with the farmers, and I think farmers in the Arava Valley likes nature and likes the environment, and I think they might listen. It's worth a try, but I don't think there was a serious try to collaborate with them.
The Institute has had many projects of Israeli and Jordanian cooperation. Most recently, Jessica said, the Ecosystem Services Project, and I'm thinking about the potential here, possibly with our partners across the Arava in Jordan, and if maybe there is a shelter garden there or not, but it might be a potential also for getting collecting seeds, things like that. Okay, Elaine may know more about it than I do. It's also stuff that we did with Sonia Twite, but it wasn't, I don't think it was in experiments.
As far as I know,
Elaine, can you
Is it working?
In the southern part of Jordan, but there are populations of the plants that we are very much interested in. And as far as I know as well, there is a law, at least for the Ficus Palmata, that you're not supposed to touch it or treat it in any way. That is progress, because before people were cutting them down for firewood, which I think is.
So first of all, my name is Elisa Mayo. I'm the Deputy Director of the Arava Institute. And Tarek asked me also to send you his apologies. He had to leave before the end of these proceedings. We do have some thoughts and plans of partnering with people in Rachma via another department of the Institute that deals with Jordan-Israel relations, run by Dr. Rina Kedem and Dr. Shlomo Halasser, for those of you who are familiar, to yes, maybe look at some kind of parallel shelter garden work together in the long run, but it's not something that at this moment is happening, but it's sort of in one of the, these are plans that we're hoping to put into place in the future kind of thing. While I have the microphone, and perhaps there'll be other questions afterwards, I do want to take a moment to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank you for everyone, both on Zoom and in person, for your patience with the technological hiccups. And I particularly want to thank our American supporters and donors who, at a very early morning hour for them, joined us to hear this very interesting and fairly scientific content about the shelter garden. And we really appreciate your support and your efforts to come and log on and join us for this event. I'll hand over to Dr. Hoffman if you have other questions, or I can't answer the science.
I guess my question is just, if we make this work beyond Israel, what are the range of tactics? I just heard the answer is that's not on the agenda for the next year or two, with a possible exception of Jordan. But for example, you know, beyond the science of studying and building these plants, could you imagine some tour group from a botanical garden in France or Germany or the UK planning a trip where they spend 3 days at the Arava Institute, 2 days at the Jerusalem Botanical Gardens, and 2 days at something working on preserving biodiversity in Jordan, and 2 days on something working on preserving biodiversity somewhere else in the region. So I think I know the answer is we're just getting started, but I do think that this is completely consistent with the brand of the Arava Institute. And I think every international person on this Zoom agrees with me. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. That's a great question. People are going to think that we planted you in the audience to ask you a question. Our short programs department is very happy to design a content-based programming also around the shelter garden and other themes and topics of environmental concern. And I think your idea makes a lovely idea for a future joint tour for Friends of Arava and the Arava Institute together. And it's certainly the future of bringing in funds for the shelter garden other than research funding will be tourism, educational tourism, we'll call it, and the like. Thank you for your question.
Amazing. I'm happy to talk also with our in-person audience.
What about the relation with the town? Do you have any relation?
These are all me. We often just are happy to have a cooperation with scientists from Kakal on a scientific basis. We are at the moment not receiving funding from Kakal for anything.
But yes, you're right. There are great botanists, scientists, conservationists, people of action in Kakal. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Jessica Scheckerman. I'm the academic director here, and I was not planning on speaking, right? I just wanted, because there were so many points that came up that reconnect to for example, the ecosystem service project that you were mentioning before. So the people of the area throughout this project were asked what are their priorities for the region. And one of the main things that came up was nature conservation and agriculture and ecotourism and so on. But nature conservation was always on top of the list. So when it was mentioned that, oh, maybe the people that are doing the agriculture, the farmers, are actually interested in nature conservation, I can already tell you, yes, they are. That's the answer. So you're walking into open doors there if you want to bring them on board for that. And I think you have a good start point where you can start to bring up more cooperation between the farmers, between and your shelter garden and the ecosystem services that you have in the region and so on. So that's already happening and that's already there.
My name is Yoram. Also known as the Orange Father. And the question is, what about big change in relation of the pollinator, the bugs and birds? You take them into account.
We globally. We know that there is a almost unimaginable crisis in terms of pollinators, especially bugs. I don't know how much research was done here, and if it was done, I am unaware of the results here locally. But certainly, we know that making sure we plant species that supply habitat, that supply resources for the local pollinators will hopefully help increase the populations of local pollinators. But I don't know if I don't know if I can answer how any declines that have been happening here might affect or even hamper our efforts to grow the populations of the local endangered plants. I mean, as long as we propagate them from cuttings, we don't really need the pollinators, which certainly we want to protect the pollinators. We want to keep the mutualistic interaction alive, so to speak.
Sorry, Oren, I talk too much. Can I have the microphone? Yes. Look, two things which were mentioned in our earlier discussions, before you came, in fact, were bats and birds. Jessica is very keen on bats. He wanted bat flowers, which apparently are not very expensive. I don't know how far bats contribute to pollination, I guess not much. But the garden as a center for other species, not necessarily, this is a very important role. And I think that if in the long term, some kind of water pond, I don't know what you call it, can be provided, it will be very positive. You see, the habitat for species of all kinds around here is being demolished. I mean, the migratory birds, which, as you know, 500,000 or something, not a huge number, pass through that. They've lost nearly all their ground. Big hotels instead of marshes. And while Michael Rosenthal did say 300 rooms of land which is available for them, it's not much. And I know that people interested in bird migration want more habitat. So I think that we should consider in the long term developing resource not only for birds, if it's possible, if money exists, so that it's a whole, after all, it's ecology. And birds don't propagate plants, but they do take seeds. I mean, they do bring seeds around. I mean, that's how seeds got to Mallorca in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, when I went there quite recently, I mean, not Mallorca, sorry, Canary Islands, Tenerife. This island has more species than almost anywhere else in the Atlantic, because they got seeds from birds and so on. And it has, I think, more species than certainly many more than England and more than Italy. And so everything that lives is part of the whole structure. And we should try, I think, to make a sort of 5-year plan which envisages this type of development as well. You see, the more you develop a long-term plan which looks feasible, not so nonsense, spend $2 million, the more likely you are to get funding for the basics. It doesn't mean because you concentrate on the small stuff that you don't get money. The more you can attract people who like birds, they're mad about them. So let them come here and see birds if they can.
Yes, thank you. Of course, I can't argue with the need and also the passion to preserve birds. And I mean, we've talked about the pond, yes, and I know long before I came here, and certainly to build one we need a good plan, and to consider what it means, and to find the right funding and to find the right location, and. With that, we're going to wrap up. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us here in person, here on Zoom, in the early hours of morning. To thank all our speakers, remote and in person. And here's to fruitful and flowerful collaboration into the future. Thank you very much.